of his Inquietude, or which means restlessness or agitation, is a piece that goes very rapidly and has redundant groupings of 3/16 notes that are slurred together. What I'm trying to show today is how to play rapid groups of notes without getting fatigued and keeping free of tension. The other thing in this piece is interpretation and what you lean on and what you resolve to through these 3-note groupings, because it cannot be sound mechanical if you do them all the same. The left hand actually governs that part of the shaping of the phrase in terms of dynamic, because the left hand is very steady with 8th notes and a rest in between. It's in 2/4 time. It starts with an E minor chord. It's an E minor. We go to the E minor chord and it goes very smoothly into a form of the 4 chord, which is a little bit of a lean, and then back to a resolution E minor, and the second beat a little lighter. So lean, less, least. So it would be good to practice very slowly what the left hand is doing even before you feed in those 3-note 16th groupings. Now when you have a dominant chord, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th measure, you would lean on that. This is a form of the dominant of E minor. So it says crescendo, so there's a bit of more leaning to that one, and then resolve it, and then less. So bum, bum, resolve, less. And then he has a secondary dominant following that to another key, and he slurs this time. He doesn't have a little rest between these punctuated chords, but has a slurred secondary dominant, means a dominant of another key. Turns out to be the dominant of B minor. So slurs it with an accent on it, and resolve it down, and then back to light. Lean, less, bum. Yeah, that makes sense. Because he's stretching that a little bit at the cadence, where he doesn't want another short, clipped resolution, as he's been doing all along. So you can see that the left hand is sort of the steadier of the right hand, keeping it steady, even though this is a piece called agitation. You still want to be steadily agitated, not out of control agitated. Of course, you're never agitated when you play, but you may want to communicate that sense of it in the piece, keeping what's Horowitz called fire and ice, where you the fire of the sound, but you keep a certain objectivity so that you don't lose control. And let's get back to the right hand now. The right hand has these rolling forward, wrist forward rolls. These have to be very even. Very even. Rest. 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 Probably leaning a little on the first one. Lean left hand, and then here's where you go forward a little. Where you think. That's the musical side of it. But the first one, you wouldn't go ba-ee-ya, da-ee-ya. You wouldn't do it there. You would just come right down, but you still have a wrist roll. Lean, less, least. You can see the slight nuance of that, where we have a lower neighbor going a little bit leaning on that middle of the 3, but not an accent, slightly. It's a nuance. And that's where you separate a person who's doing very robotic playing from someone who's really thinking about what's happening and how also the harmony is affecting, feeding into the right hand's cajoling of those 3-note 16th patterns. Now, in order to get the dynamics, you're going to use your arm weight, as I always say. You're not going to be firing hard, fast piston point fingers into this, but you're going to overall, over your 3-note rolls, you're going to leverage your arm weight, as you can see I'm doing. So on the second beat of the first measure and leaning a little toward the 4 chord, lean, less, least, lean, less, least. These have to be very even. Very even. Rest. 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 So be real careful when you're practicing slowly to hear the shapes of these 3-note groupings and how the wrist is supple and is just falling forward, rolling forward, and not tightening up. Now in the middle section, so this was E minor, he modulated to B minor, and then he goes down from the B minor modulation to G major. And the G major is the major relative of E minor. E minor and G major are partners. G major has its relative minor. They both have the same key signature, natural minor, 1 sharp of E minor, 1 sharp of G major. Now what he does in this middle section with the harmony that affects the rollout up here is he leans on the diminished chord. So he has a diminished chord that's a neighbor chord here, and it's now MF. It's a higher dynamic overall in this midsection at MF. And then he has little swells out and diminuendos in, which he did in the first part too, when I went a little bit leaning on the 4 chord, pulled back to the 1. That is actually shown with a hairpin where you go out, a little bit of a swell, and then you have a diminuendo. In this part, we have a lifted level of that. So we have the diminished chord. I would isolate the left hand and less, lean, less, least. Dominant 7 of G major, lean, less, resolve it. Now we are back to the primary dominant with a measure of getting softer and a little bit broader before we're going to return to the beginning. So here's the primary dominant of E minor. I would give it a little bit more here and then less, and change the tempo. Remember, it's all proportion to what tempo I'm practicing in. So if you're practicing slower, I would go very slowly there. And then he goes back into the tempo. Bump, bump, less. 4 chord, lean, less, least, dominant, resolve it, secondary, primary dominant, sorry, stays with the primary dominant now. So what he did here is he went to the primary dominant of E minor. So hands together a little bit of the middle section, which I consider the climax, in back tempo, showing how I'm leaning toward a little bit the diminished chord in the second beat, then resolving it in, we're in G major here, so lean, less, least, lean, less, least, lean, less, back to primary dominant tonic, then you're back in tempo. Because remember, I'm doing everything behind tempo for now. So you can see how we're now leaning on the diminished chord, then resolving into the G major, because we've gone into G major. Then we've meandered back with a broadening and a slight diminuendo back to the A section, which was in the first section, E minor. And all the way through, I have my wrist rolling forward. See? Level, then forward. Ta-da, ta-da, and forward. So you have to be level in order to go forward, right? Ta-da, ta-da. So that's what's happening there. Now, at the very end, something changes. The ending is, you could say it's bigger, but it's just ending the piece. What it is at the end is the left hand doesn't have any more punctuated chords with little rests in between. It has a legato. So it goes and then the right hand can support that a little too. Now here was the cadence, so we don't have the forte yet. We have it here, and then fading off. Finally, nothing. So you basically have a section with E minor, modulating over to B minor, go to your B section, G major, then going back to E minor, and staying there to the very end.